for tuning in.
This week on Top Trends, we got a big story. Tour of the Tech Giant is all talk of Reddits and subreddits. Apparently, leaked financial documents have crowds talking and speculating about Giant merger.
Team meeting, right now.
Hey guys.
Have a seat.
Okay.
Mark, as you know, we've had a serious data breach. After a lot of investigating, we've determined that the initial compromise came from your account.
I know you were transferring a lot of financial data back and forth prior to our acquisition. Did you follow company policy and use a VPN?
No, just guest Wi-Fi. It didn't even require a password.
Welcome to the cybersecurity series. I'm so glad you joined us today. I have to admit, I'm still laughing at our poor friend Mark from the opening video segment. If you've seen our other episodes, you'll know that this was the predictable result of his unfortunate online behavior. If this is the first episode you're watching, I invite you to watch the opening segments of our previous 2 episodes to see just what Mark was up to that landed him in this situation. And Mark, if you're out there, please, just step away from the keyboard. If Mark is our mascot of what not to do, during this episode we'll introduce you to Earl, who is the superhero of incident response. He was mentioned in one of the promo videos the studio team put together and left a lot of people asking, who's Earl? Stay tuned, you will meet him soon. Today we'll be talking about incident response, which is one of the most exciting roles in cybersecurity. Our guest will give us an insider's look at what it's like to be a first responder to a cybersecurity incident and how Microsoft's detection and response team is on the front lines of that effort. We'll take a peek at some of the common events that are creating security incidents today, get some sage advice on how to prepare for cyber incidents, and hear some great career advice before we wrap up with a live Q&A session. So please feel free to enter your questions in the chat as we go along. With that, I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, MacKenzie Brown. With over a decade of experience in cybersecurity, MacKenzie is an incident manager for Microsoft's detection and response team, known by its acronym as DART. Her technical and research experience help her provide proactive and reactive cybersecurity support and crisis management to Microsoft's customers around the globe. You can find MacKenzie promoting cybersecurity and tech-based organizations in and around Boise, the capital of her native Idaho. She's a passionate advocate of women in technology, mentorship, cybersecurity recruiting, and helping bridge tech sector gaps. MacKenzie, welcome. So glad to have you with us today.
Glad to be here.
So, by the way, I have to say a special thank you because you endured the longest flight delay for the shortest flight coming from Boise to Salt Lake City. I think your delay was 7 times the length of your actual flight.
Yeah.
Lots of time spent in an airport. Not
So-
my first rodeo, but definitely when the airport is near home, it tends to be a little frustrating.
Yeah, thank you for making the effort and being here with us today. We do appreciate it. So in this first segment, we'll talk a little bit about some of the great stuff you do in your role as an incident manager, also some of the great stuff that Microsoft is doing. Before I get to some of those questions, though, your title is Incident Manager, and the title of this episode is Incident Response. Both of those have the I word in there, which is not used trivially. Incident. Can you just give us an idea of what the industry refers to when we talk about incidents?
Yeah. So I do try to be very specific because not just our team, but many organizations, security teams, and third-party vendors and partners, they try to be specific around the taxonomy that we use. So the term incident and breach, compromise, intrusion, security event are not loosely used. So we don't say the B word per se, because if you're talking about a breach, for example, it's usually a validation that your data information assets have for sure been exposed through not just confidentiality, but potentially leaked, as we've seen in the video, exfiltrated, exposed depending upon the threat actor you're dealing with. And a lot of those words we don't tend to use even as third-party responders right away. Unless there's a lawyer in a room, then when we know what words to use. But
Thank you.
there is some specificity around using the term incident. And generally, if you're responding to an incident, we have validated without a doubt that there are indicators of compromise in your environment and that your critical assets and or just assets have been potentially compromised, or you have a live threat actor in your environment. You need to respond.
Great, thank you. So an incident basically means the alarm bells are ringing, somebody needs to do something.
Yep, absolutely.
We'll talk a little bit about that in our learning segment today too, sort of what's the line between an event, which could be anything, and when it crosses over to an incident. So, Incident Manager at Microsoft's Detection and Response Team, or DART. So can you help us understand, so what do you do?
So it sounds a lot cooler sometimes when I say incident manager, but we really are, I sometimes think security therapists. It sounds weird, but we are focused on not just the operational efficacy of our team, but also our primary role, which is to be that intake, that first person on the phone contacting a customer after they've had a, not B word, but a validated incident. So we may not even be the first contact. At Microsoft, we have other teams that actually focus on validating, okay, Mr. Customer, present this. Is this actually
really an incident?
Is this a false positive? Is your
Yeah.
configuration just a little wonky? Is your telemetry not necessarily showing everything correctly? Once it gets to us, we know it is an absolute incident and compromise to some degree, especially at that domain level. So we're picking up the phone and kind of balancing the emotions that are going on, and then also doing our due diligence. Even if a customer decides not to work with our team, we want to make sure that, okay, we're going to give you all of the information we know, all the threat intelligence if available, any sort of recommendations for hardening. This is what you need to do to contain, stop the bleeding, and that's a big part of our role.
When you first said we're kind of like therapists, I was like, well, that's interesting. But really, when you're on the phone or on site with someone, this really is kind of the worst day of their life often. That, oh, man, things have just gone nuts with our network or our business is shutting down or whatever. So sometimes maybe it starts with virtual holding hands and say, it's going to be okay, we're going to get through this.
I'm waiting for that Teams action there.
That's
a feature
great,
where you're
that's
like,
a great,
and now we're holding hands.
Hey, you work for Microsoft, maybe you could make it happen.
Let's make that dog food setting happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it was inherent in the answer that you gave, but primarily your customers, clients, what do you?
Customers.
Primarily your customers are external to Microsoft, right? You're not the internal.
Not the internal. We have an extremely large and impressive internal incident response team. And you can imagine Microsoft, among many organizations in the world, is highly targeted on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So we are that customer-facing global team, and our team's spread all across the world.
Sounds very exciting. Somewhat chaotic, but very exciting.
Minus the airport, yeah.
Like I said,
Chaotic.
minus sitting at
Minus
the
the
airport for
airport.
7 hours. But as I said in the opening, incident response really is one of the most exciting aspects of cybersecurity because, one, you never really know for sure what's going to happen on any given day. And then two, it sometimes is just total chaos.
Absolutely. And I like to think of your ability to respond as the backbone of a cybersecurity program too, right? Because we want to risk and governance level, get everything inventoried and monitored, and we want to be able to detect and or mitigate. But what do we do when things happen? That is absolutely going to be what I think is the primary objective for security teams to make sure that they're prepared for.
Sorry about that. We're using the iPad
feel like we need to
today.
pick up the phone.
It's true. We're using the iPad for live Q&A, so please keep the questions coming. We'll get to them. Somebody's account just got a FaceTime call coming in, so maybe it's a good question, but you'll have to type it and put it in the chat for us to answer it. So thanks for that. That was the ringing in the background. So, by the way, Dart. That's got kind of like S.H.I.E.L.D. does with Marvel, kind of a superhero. Is it possible that you and your coworkers are undercover like cyber superheroes?
I mean, I feel like we're still waiting to get bit by some spiders, and that results in more powers or something better than the ability to use PowerPoint and Excel perfectly. But, and that's probably consulting 101, but we do feel a little bit like a superhero team. When you join an incident response team, especially a third-party one where you have many customers. Every week you're in a different environment in many cases, and all over the world, different industries. But you're seeing things before we're hoping they don't hit the headlines, right? So we're seeing almost the future as it's happening because we're up against a pretty sophisticated and impressive threat landscape, essentially. These actors
we're definitely going to talk about what they're doing in a few minutes.
Yep.
By the way, I think I just heard my 17-year-old son, Sam, groan with the dad joke on the whole Dart S.H.I.E.L.D. thing, but it's the best I could come up with today, and a great answer. Thanks for that.
you.
So, Dart, I understand detection and response, both, as we said in the opening, proactive and then reactive, trying to help customers avoid and then help them respond appropriately when bad stuff happens.
Yep.
You're an incident response manager. What other titles and roles do your teammates have in Dart?
Great question. So as an incident manager, right, we're holding hands with a customer. We're getting things, scoping what's really going on. We want to get all the information gathered. And then our second primary objective is putting a team together. We want to have all the right resources that can accompany all the activities that are necessary during an investigation assigned to that customer. And they're available and ready to go, whether it's put them, hopefully not with a 7-hour layover, but put them on a plane and or get them logged in quickly and working with the customer within the hours. So it's important for us to be able to fill specific roles. So the primary one is going to be, and like much incident management type of trainings, is a lead investigator and incident handler. And that person is the ringleader of the circus, essentially, and they're really being that bridge between the customer, the bridge between the network room and the boardroom, in a sense, and then working with delegating tasks. Then we have threat hunting. So that's a fun buzzword, but not a buzzword. It's absolutely a necessary type of role, and that's almost being Sherlock Holmes. Everyone on our team is trained in it. Some people are much better at it, and because it comes naturally.
Yeah.
It's pivoting between what you find, leads and indicators, and knowing which way to turn. And as they find these leads, it could be a system that's been compromised. Then we have forensic and endpoint analysts who pull it apart and look and see exactly what happened on that machine, so we can get root cause.
Yeah. First of all, on threat hunting, I think looking for indicators of compromise, known indicators of compromise, but I'm also fascinated by that field of trying to discover the undiscovered every day.
Yeah.
Searching for the elusive 0-day vulnerability that nobody else knew about, and and then jumping on it right away.
Right, looking through a lot of data, a lot of data
I
sets.
think, yeah, that's maybe the part that convinces me that it's not for me. But I think your mention of all of these roles is really helpful. And again, it exemplifies just how vast the profession of cybersecurity is. There are so many different roles for so many different skill sets and interest levels in certain things. So thanks for those answers. I think this gives us a good foundation to move into our learning segment today, where we'll learn about some of the nuts and bolts of what actually occurs during the incident response process. And finally, for those who have been asking the question, who is Earl? So let's go ahead and roll that.
To better understand incident response, we've asked Earl to give us a hand. Earl knows a thing or two about responding to incidents. That's because when faced with an incident, the proper response is to pick on Earl. We'll get back to you in a minute, Earl. Before we talk about how we respond to a security incident, we need to define what a security incident is. The National Institute of Science and Technology defines a security incident as an occurrence that actually or potentially jeopardizes the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of an information system or the information the system processes, stores, or transmits. In other words, a security incident is any event that endangers or threatens to endanger our data, our networks, or our devices. Cybersecurity professionals commonly deal with multiple security events every day. The challenge is deciding whether an event is a harmless occurrence or evidence of a harmful security incident. For example, is a failed account logon simply the result of a user who forgot their new password? Or is the failed account logon evidence that someone is attempting to gain unauthorized access to our network through a brute force attack? Once we've classified a security event as an incident, it is time to respond. Incident response is like a fire station when the fire bell rings. Rather than jumping into fire trucks when the bell rings, it is time to pick on Earl. Pick on Earl represents an acronym, PIC on ERL, that reminds us what a well-executed incident response looks like. Preparation includes policies, procedures, planning, and practicing how we respond to security incidents. The first three letters of preparation, PRE, remind us that this important step needs to be completed pre-incident. Identification includes the process of determining whether a security event is a harmless anomaly or an incident in need of response. It also includes determining what kind of incident we are dealing with. Once we have properly identified an incident, we need to contain it. Containment may include things like eliminating account access, killing a process, or even unplugging network or power cables. The most important aspect of containment is to stop the malicious activity from spreading. After containing the damage, we need to eradicate or eliminate any malicious artifacts that have entered our system. Eradication sometimes includes things like wiping drives and restoring data from a backup, eliminating or reconfiguring access, applying patches, or replacing devices. After eradication, recovery begins. This is when we bring our networks and devices back online and resume safe operations. During recovery, we should monitor our systems very carefully, keeping an eye out for anything out of the ordinary or any evidence that malicious access or artifacts have returned. The final step is to review what lessons we learned from the incident response process. The best incident response procedures include a written report of what happened, how we responded, and recommendations for avoiding a repeat of the incident. These reports should be reviewed together by security and business teams, and relevant learnings from the report should be incorporated into our preparation to make us more effective at combating future incidents. Thanks for walking us through our incident response, Earl, and thanks for letting us pick on you whenever we have a security incident.
That was a great learning segment, and we finally got to meet Earl, our superhero of incident response. So I know my son might be groaning yet again, but it helps us get the point across. And those are great, important steps. The one thing that really stood out to me, and it was called out in the video, was it all starts with a plan. And if we don't have a plan, well, it's a plan for disaster, as the saying goes. I think that a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, sometimes they don't have an incident response plan, and they think it's because, well, either we're too small, nothing bad's going to happen to us, My suspicion is that's a less frequent opinion these days. But the other one is, this all sounds so complicated, I don't even know where to start. So what advice might you have for those that think that way?
Oh, well, I will say that we have absolutely seen it all. As far as organizations with no plan, the zero plan method, that's never a great method to have unless you just love excitement. Or I like to consider it the dusty plan, the plan that's kind of a copy and paste policy procedure and someone signed their name at the bottom. But a real incident response plan is important because it lays out all of your stakeholders, the people you call, and it's not just inclusive to the people within your organization, but also your partners, your vendors, cyber insurance partners.
Maybe DART.
Maybe DART. Maybe DART, yes. We definitely are very busy, so we take that call for sure. Maybe I will pick up that call. But that plan is important to have those roles and responsibilities kind of laid out so that people know exactly what to do.
Yeah. So just start somewhere.
Start somewhere,
and
anything.
If you don't know what to do, call MacKenzie or
we will
or
come
phone
up with
a
a plan.
friend.
The plan is us. We are the plan.
Yeah, even if it's a shoe repair business with one employee, if there is a computer connected to the internet,
Yep.
you got to have at least a plan.
Yep. Yep.
Awesome. So at DART, you get to see all the bad stuff that's happening all around the world every single day. Can you give us an idea of what some of the more common incidents are that you're responding to at DART?
We're so excited to talk all the bad stuff in the world today. It's
so
exciting. It is really interesting and intriguing, especially if you're in cybersecurity and you really want to be on those front lines and see what's going on. Everything that you can imagine of what we're responding to today is we still see occasionally the distributed denial of service types of attacks, those DOS attacks. Ransomware is big winner, usually a greatest hits album always comes back with those ransomware groups. And then what we're seeing a lot more is the IT and OT environment really trying to keep up with the sophistication of attacks with the innovation of more smart technology, as well as keeping up with our critical infrastructure. So the types of attacks we are focused out.
I'm going to cut in. You said IT and OT. We talk about IoT, Internet of Things, the
IoT
Alexa,
and OT.
the vacuum cleaner. I'm thinking at my house of all of the fridge, all of the things that are now smart connected.
Yes.
As well as the OT, and you just started to mention, I think.
Yeah.
Your infrastructures, your water, your power, your air traffic controllers, whatever those are that run on. Some of them on some very old systems, the SCADA
very old
systems. That are out there.
And it's not necessarily new. They've been dealing with a lot of security risks and keeping up with the Joneses. But it is a big deal, as we've seen in the past couple years, where you see counties and states and countries impacted with that trickle-down effect of a power company going out or having issues, or a water company being potentially targeted and operationally affected. So critical infrastructure is a big thing that most security companies are trying to focus on from an incident response side.
A lot of the things that you mentioned, I think most of our minds sort of tend to go towards criminal activities. Ransomware especially, because it's a way that criminals have monetized breaches or incidents, in this case locking down an entire network and demanding a ransom payment for it. I don't want to jump ahead, but our next episode may be all about ransomware. And
fun!
Yeah, but there's a whole nother side of that. I don't think that's actually good English. Whole nother. There's another side of that, which is nation states, actual governments of countries that are getting involved in some of what we always attributed to, oh, that's a criminal organization out there. Kind of what I would call sort of this blurred line attack, where is it a nation state? Is it organized crime? And the answer sounds like is
yes.
Yes. Yeah.
There's certainly a criminal ecosystem of what we refer to, and the state of cyber crime as a whole. There are a lot of criminal organizations out there, and they even morph into new organizations. But these nation-state-based cyber threat groups are certainly ones we track from a threat intelligence side. So not just Microsoft, but on our team also. That's something we have to keep a pulse on what's going on, because we see a lot of this fun intermingling on the dark web of criminal orgs being hired out for ransomware as a service, or initial access as a service is a big one, taking over cloud environments, but they get hired out by nation-state threat groups.
You just mentioned access as a service, or initial access as a service.
Initial access,
That's
brokerage,
really interesting, because I was about to say, so we talk about all these incidents, which is sort of the end of the road where the bad things finally demonstrate themselves. But they all start with somebody gaining access to a device or a network who wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. There's sort of this, checklist. Step 1, gain access to the network. Step 2, look around. Sometimes we talk about privilege escalation and all that. But basically, once you're through the front door, try and decide, what is it that I'm actually going to do now that I'm here? And from what you're saying is, we used to hear about, people sell credentials online, usernames, passwords. But now they're selling, hey folks, not only am I willing to sell you usernames or passwords, I've actually accessed this network. I've checked step 1 for you, and I'll just sell you the access, ready-made access. That's almost a little frightening, MacKenzie.
And that blurred line adds to the sensitivity of incident response. We went through the whole life cycle earlier, and really what does it mean to recover your environment is so imperative nowadays, because if they were able to take data or take all of the credentials from all of your user accounts, map your network, anything from a reconnaissance side, and they're selling that, or drop persistent mechanisms, backdoors, where they can sell that access, that is a part of that ecosystem we're certainly concerned about and trying to keep up with, really. So you can recover your environment, but you need to make sure you're fully recovering your environment, because you could get hit again.
So going back to that initial access, are there trends that you see, what we sometimes refer to as attack vectors or even entry vectors? Are there trends that you see that the bad people are using to get into those networks?
Yeah, they're probably the least, sexy, exciting type of Avenger trends, unfortunately. They're still the same old thing, right? We're talking about phishing campaigns, probably more targeted phishing, and especially when an attacker is in an environment focusing on spear phishing, so it's coming from legitimate credentials. So that's still very prevalent today, but honestly, a very top one is misconfiguration of your environment in general, and you're not patching. So unpatched,
not keeping things up to date.
Yep, unpatched systems, wide open, even VPNs without authentication, and ultimately just thinking about your assets that are internet connected and facing. Those can be easily picked up, whether it's by a threat actor or some kid playing on Shodan. This is definitely something mostly normal and basic that we like to promote, to focus on.
And still, in so many cases, email-based entry through, Bob in the accounting department that just has to click on the cute kitty video or whatever it is.
I mean, I love cats.
Yeah,
so.
Who doesn't?
It's the biggest, that's the easiest bait right there.
It just keeps working.
Yeah.
So any guesses? Does Microsoft put anything out that helps us sort of anticipate what the future brings for incidents?
Yeah. So we work with a team called Mystic at Microsoft. They're the threat intelligence team, DART, and then Defender product teams. We work together to put out a lot of blogs of what we're seeing. So something that is happening right there to many organizations around the world, well, we're going to write about it, whether it's a threat actor group or a new technique or tactic. The other thing is the Microsoft Digital Defense Report. There should be a new one coming out here shortly, but between last year's and this year's, it examines based on real data, real signals. Microsoft picks up 24 trillion signals a year based upon what we're analyzing and what we're collecting through that data from a threat intelligence side. So we are also looking at DART data. We're trying to anonymize it, but to focus on those countries of origin from a nation-state perspective, types of malware that's most commonly used, and of course, initial attack entry vectors. That data is super special. So the Digital Defense Report really lays out what we're concerned about.
And I think that's a free resource, right?
It's free.
People can look it up, Google it, keep checking for when the next one comes out. They can download it, and it's really very informative.
Yep.
So great plug there. So, okay, MacKenzie, we're here at WGU. Our mascot is Sage the Night Owl. And so we like to have some sage tips that we throw in. For this episode's Sage Tips, we're going to take 1 minute and look at a promotional video that the studio team put together for this episode. It's an incident response scenario that really just looks like a train wreck. And so then I'm going to ask your advice on what could be done differently so that a scenario like that doesn't occur. So
I can't wait.
let's go ahead and watch that video for a second.
Today, we've done it. Nothing can stop us now. Fortune 500, here we come!
We're being hacked?
Execute the plan.
Right, yeah. Sorry. What plan?
There is no plan? We're ruined!
Help! We need a firewall! Highly paid leadership has us under control. We need Earl.
Who's Earl?
Where is Earl?
There is no Earl!
You don't have to be a cybersecurity expert to have a plan, but you do need a plan.
All right, it was a train wreck, kind of a funny one, and I don't even know if I should ask this. Have you ever seen something like that in real life?
I think we think that's what's going on before they call us.
Okay.
The calls can be very quiet, like, we don't really want to tell you what emotional things have just happened in this conference room. But yeah, that's probably pretty accurate.
So to avoid the train wreck scenario, for our sort of best practices or sage tips, what do you got?
I mean, a plan, right? We've been talking about that a lot, having a plan, but testing that plan is huge too. So the details of having a disaster recovery plan, a business continuity plan, an insurance plan in a sense where you meet the contractual obligations. All of those go hand in hand with your incident response plan. And, it's never going to be perfect, but having something in place means we can test it out and do some tabletop exercises, but really get in there and at least there's something written down with someone's name.
Great advice. Thanks for the sage advice, sage tips for the day. Okay, I've really been looking forward to this last segment before we get to our live Q&A, and that is career advice. I know that you took something of an unorthodox route into cybersecurity and incident response. Do you mind sharing briefly your journey with us?
Yeah, happy to. It is very non-traditional and unorthodox for sure. I went to college and didn't really know what I wanted to do and never knew that cybersecurity was an option. So I had a great mentor from day one when I was able to get a fabulous IT support job to usually just pay rent. That's most college kids.
Yeah.
But he dropped NIST 853 on my desk and said, I need help with an audit. You seem qualified enough. And also said you should consider a career in cyber. So I went more of a certification route and self-training and working my way up. And I've been in many different careers between public and private sector, but research and development of frameworks and technical writing, a lot of proactive security program building, security operations, looking at a dashboard all day. I mean, I've experienced it a lot now, incident response, that while it's unorthodox, if I could do something differently, it would have been finish college. Then again, past Mac didn't have the options of what we see in curriculums today, having cyber programs. That's huge. And I don't even remember that being a thing, let alone STEM talked about like it is today when I was a kid.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. The cybersecurity profession is so broad, and you have worked in several aspects of it before you ended up in incident response. What advice do you have for people who say, I think I want to work in cybersecurity, but I'm not even sure what I would do?
Well, it's so broad. I mean, I mentioned a few roles on our team just for incident response, but they go further than that. We have developers on our team, we have reverse engineers, we know threat intelligence experts, there's security analysts for the operational side, pen testing and red teaming. There's so much to do. My advice would be not just like pick one, but start somewhere. and find what, if it's a security analyst position, you're staring at a dashboard all day, find what you are passionate about. Some of us have skill sets in areas that will lead us to coding or lead us to incident response. We may like the fires, and we may want to put out what we call dumpster fires. You may be a dumpster fire diver and you want to go for that. Then you got to try it all a little bit.
That's great
There's
advice.
so much to do, though, in cyber alone.
Great advice. You've been amazingly successful in your career. My guess is you've also gotten used to being one of very few females on most of the teams that you're working on. Cybersecurity and IT in general is still a male-dominated profession. What can you share about your experience as a woman in cybersecurity?
That's a whole novel. I could probably
We
break
could have
down.
a whole episode about it, couldn't we? We'll have you back
should have
again.
a whole episode on diversity and inclusion. But certainly when I first started my career, I feel like when you're in a smaller office, you don't notice it as much. And then as you get into the private sector consulting, you notice it a lot more. You go to conferences and events, you certainly see that 25% stand out. And at first it bothered me and it made me uncomfortable, but then I started to learn from it. I started to be more aware of my imposter syndrome. But most importantly, I started to change my perspective on diversity and what it means. Starting with getting more women into the field is that first step, but evolving past that is also diversifying educational backgrounds, cultures, things that we need that collectively improve a group's ability to work on something and collaborate.
A couple of things I'd like to reiterate. One, you mentioned diversity, not just sexual, gender diversity, but also that diversity of perspective, that the different backgrounds that people bring with them, as well as some of the different educational perspectives bring. It adds a level of creativity that we really do need in the field.
Yeah.
Second topic that you mentioned imposter syndrome. And I've heard from some other women who say, we're already sort of feel like we may not fit in because there's all these men on the team and not so many women. It's just another thing. So what advice do you have on overcoming imposter syndrome, whether for a woman or for a man?
I think first step is recognizing you have a problem, as any first step goes. But I think what I realized as I've grown in my career is that everybody has imposter syndrome. I also find that there's no cure for it. You can only alleviate the symptoms a little bit. But if you can get tabs on it quickly, it keeps us humble, it keeps us confident at times, it keeps us on our toes, and then it allows us to improve. So there's probably a good side to imposter syndrome as much as it is a negative thing as well. But everyone has it for sure, and asking those questions.
You mentioned too, first of all, hey, if you're in the job, somebody saw either already existing ability or potential. So just go for it. The other thing, though, you mentioned was very early on you had a mentor who pushed you into the NIST 800 whatever, the special publications. How important is mentorship, especially for women trying to increase their representation in the cybersecurity field?
It's really important. In one of our organizations back in Idaho, we say the C to B, or you have to C to B. So that comes at every person's ladder or stage in the ladder they're climbing, but every stage in their journey and career. Mentorship's a big part of that. And it doesn't need to be, I'm Mr. Miyagi, I'm calling you every day and learning to wax on and off. But you are having a contact of someone who believes in you, who's dropping the wonderful audit project on your lap, but also is able to give you career advice and navigate things that aren't necessarily pertaining to your job, but getting the next job or getting that promotion or learning something new and solving a problem. Mentorship's extremely important for that. And then I think equally volunteerism. So more representation for women in this field means we need more women in positions like mine or other security positions. You could be security marketing, you could be in security recruitment, you could be in development and coding. Getting out there and talking to younger women, so high school level, college level, helps find accounting people and getting them into our career, finance and business people. really diversifying education, but inspiring the younger generation that there's options.
Yes, I think you really nailed it. We need to build cybersecurity into even elementary school curriculum.
Yeah.
So we talk about STEM, but cybersecurity as part of that, especially because all of these kids now are growing up on an interconnected life, really. So that I always say, so that when the 6th graders are asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? It's not just astronaut, president of the U.S., doctor, lawyer, but also cybersecurity professional.
Or DJ, or
That's true.
Influencer. I see that a lot. But if I feel like if the 6th grade class knows more about the advertisements between their YouTube videos, then we might be doing something wrong. We need to focus on teaching these household terms that we're talking about. These should be taught in every house, I think, and that improves.
Such great
over time.
advice. So we've had a few questions come in, and a couple of them are for you.
Great.
One is, what sources does DART rely on to determine actual risks? We talk about threats and vulnerabilities. Do you focus more on the threat side, more on the vulnerability side, or is it kind of a
soup of all of those? So as far as sources, I mean, if I'm interpreting the question correctly, so apologies if I'm not.
I think they're asking sort of what do you watch? What's the dashboard that you're looking at that says, uh-oh, something's coming, folks?
So to be able to determine if something's really happening and validating it even throughout our investigation, we rely on the data that we collect. So you can only do so much with the evidence that you have. So data is a source in itself, as we all know. We also rely heavily on the partners we have at Microsoft. So that threat intelligence team, if we see an anomaly, whether it's a malicious file or an IP address or domain or activity that looks funky, we work very closely with them for them to say, we've seen this before, this is what that is, this is where else we have seen those things. So a risk is generally in your face, right? You see a bunch of vulnerabilities on a system you're analyzing. Sometimes those are like the low-hanging fruits to figure out risk. MFA is not enabled, right? You have risk right in front of you. You know what's configured or not. As far as threats go, it sometimes takes a little bit more critical thinking and analysis and working with your partners to figure out what your threats are.
What's the average size company that DART has as customers?
As customer, the average size of an organization,
or maybe that's a tough question.
Or the amount of customer. I don't know.
How about what we're getting to?
We've seen it all. We've truly seen it all.
What we're getting to is, are your customers little companies, medium companies, gigantic companies, global companies?
Yes.
Excellent.
All the above.
Yeah.
We've worked with smaller school districts or small law firms, and a lot of that is because even if you are a smaller company, just because you don't have a SOC in your backyard.
Security Operations
Center. Backyard could have thrown that off too, like a SOC in your backyard. Just because you don't have that doesn't necessarily mean that that's not a business, cyber is not a business priority. So small and medium businesses are still a component for us because they go through insurance policies and they need recovery efforts, or they need someone to come in and do a tabletop. So our customers are all over.
A follow-up to that is, how often are small companies targeted, and is that changing? I think the answer is all the time.
All the time.
It's kind of like the old anomaly. How fast do you need to be to outrun a bear? And it is just faster than the other guy.
Well, also, what's the likelihood that we're going to run a bear in here? So I think that's also a part of it, is threat analysis or threat modeling your company. If you are a small optometrist office, you might be more concerned about your health records and PII. So you can threat model around, hey, here are our risks. Here's the likelihood that my small medium business is going to get hit with ransomware, and our backups are also connected, and we need to call DART or someone else to come fix this. So
great. There's one more. I want to recognize that the question came in. We're not going to take the time to answer it all. The question is, can you describe the process of information gathering on a quarantine system? And my belief is that is a system which has been now taken offline because something bad happened. So you're in that containment phase of pick on Earl.
Right.
And
take offline, don't turn it off.
Yeah. First of all,
Is there
right,
some
right. Don't turn it off.
Define isolation.
Don't turn it, and make sure it's actually quarantined before you start.
Make sure you've
before
got
you
that
start
data.
messing with it.
It's not unheard of that sometimes we get systems that we're like, hey, this is weird. Can we analyze that system? And they've already cleaned it up. We're like, great, that's.
So MacKenzie, we're out of time. We could have taken 2 more episodes worth of information from you. So great, your industry knowledge, your experience, your advice for everybody has just been fantastic. Don't be surprised if we ask you to come back again. We just may need to figure out a way that you don't have to wait at the airport.
Yeah,
for so
yeah,
long
yeah.
next time.
Just get a jet plane, come pick me up. It might be easier.
Yeah,
I'll
thank you.
drive.
And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We had one other question on where you can find Pick on Earl or the other learning segments in here. We have a QR code for a new YouTube channel where we're putting those segments. Use them freely, learn, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, because each time any of us does something more securely on the internet, we're all contributing to the overall digital security infrastructure of our nation. So our next episode will be December 14th. Just in time for the holiday season, we'll be talking about the gift that nobody wants to receive, and I mentioned before, ransomware. We're lining up a great panel of experts. I don't know why I wanted to say efforts. We're lining up a great panel of experts who will help us understand what ransomware is, what to do to try and avoid it, and like MacKenzie has told us today, what to do in the event that we have to respond to it. So we'll see you back on December 14th for the next episode. Until then, by all means, dust off your incident response plan and go out and practice it somewhere. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.